A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
Have you ever noticed how some people can look at a massive spreadsheet of data and feel a sense of calm or control, while for others, that same screen triggers a physiological response that looks remarkably like a fight-or-flight reflex? It is as if the numbers themselves are perceived as a physical threat by the brain. We call it the number-induced freeze response. Your palms get sweaty, your heart rate climbs, and suddenly your ability to perform basic addition vanishes. Today's prompt from Daniel is about math anxiety and financial management. He is looking for strategies that move beyond the traditional spreadsheet for people who experience real, visceral stress when dealing with numerical data. We are moving away from the spreadsheet as panacea myth and looking at how to build systems that respect the human nervous system.
This is a compelling intersection of neurobiology and personal finance, corn. I am Herman Poppleberry, and I have been digging into some research from the Journal of Consumer Psychology that validates what Daniel is asking about. They found that math anxiety is a distinct psychological construct. It isn't about general intelligence or even necessarily being bad at arithmetic. It is a specific type of cognitive interference where the anxiety itself consumes the working memory you need to process the numbers. Research indicates that this affects approximately 20% of the adult population. So, when someone tells a person with math anxiety to just sit down and make a budget, they are essentially asking them to perform a complex task while their brain's emergency alarm system is screaming in the background. It is like trying to solve a crossword puzzle while a tiger is staring you down.
It's the ultimate catch-22. You need your executive function to manage your money, but the act of managing your money shuts down your executive function. Most financial advice ignores this. It assumes everyone has a neutral emotional relationship with a bank statement. But if looking at your balance makes your heart race, you are going to avoid it. We need to talk about financial dyscalculia and how it manifests in a world that is increasingly dominated by complex fintech interfaces. Even if you are highly analytical in your professional life, the specific sensory input of a ledger can be a trigger.
You're right. The cognitive load of tracking is the real killer here. Manual entry fails for those with high sensory or numerical sensitivity because it requires constant, high-frequency engagement with the very thing that causes distress. Every time you buy a sandwich and have to categorize it, you are poking the bear. We need to look at how we can decouple financial health from the act of manual calculation. How do we create a system where the numbers are working in the background so the human does not have to face the firing squad every single day?
Let's look at how we actually do that. The traditional way to budget is zero-sum tracking. You spend $5 on coffee, you write it down, you subtract it from your coffee category, and you see what is left. For someone with math anxiety, that is a dozen microstressors every single day. Every transaction is a math problem and a potential moment of shame or failure. What if we shifted from that zero-sum tracking to what we might call flow state or bucket-based liquidity management?
The bucket-based approach is a total game changer for reducing cognitive load. Instead of tracking every cent after it is spent, you front-load the decision-making. You use automated abstraction. This is where modern fintech and API-driven tools are genuinely useful. You can set up a system where your income hits a primary account and is immediately distributed into virtual sub-accounts or buckets via automated transfers. You have one bucket for rent, one for utilities, one for savings, and then one for spendable cash. This uses the envelope method logic but digitizes it so the math happens automatically via the bank's backend.
And the key here is that the spendable cash bucket is the only number you ever have to look at. It becomes a binary system. Is there money in the green bucket? Yes or no. If yes, you can buy the coffee. If no, you don't. You have completely removed the need to remember how much you spent on groceries 3 days ago, or to calculate how much is left in your monthly entertainment budget. The system holds the constraints, so your brain doesn't have to. But Herman, what about the trade-offs? If we set and forget everything, do we lose that granular awareness that keeps people from overspending?
That is a valid concern, Corm. Behavioral economists often talk about the pain of paying as a necessary friction to keep spending in check. When you automate everything, you risk losing that connection. However, for the math-anxious person, the alternative isn't granular awareness, it is total avoidance. So, the trade-off is worth it. We are trading a perfect detailed ledger for a functional, sustainable system. This connects back to what we discussed in episode 833 regarding the spiky profile and nonlinear time perception. Many people who struggle with math anxiety also struggle with the traditional monthly calendar.
Right. Episode 833 was all about how a month is a long, abstract unit of time that doesn't necessarily exist in the way our brains perceive reality. If you get paid once a month, but your expenses are daily, the math required to pace yourself over 30 days is quite complex. It requires a level of linear temporal forecasting that many neurodivergent people find exhausting. By using those automated buckets, you are effectively shortening the feedback loop. You are turning a complex 30-day calculation into a simple real-time visual check. You are managing your liquidity in a flow state rather than a grid state.
I love that term, grid state. Most budgeting apps are just grids, but our lives are flows. If we use virtual sub-accounts as hard constraints rather than just tracking categories, we change the physics of the budget. If you use a tracking app, the money is all still in one big pile in your bank account, and the app is just telling you a story about that money. But for someone with high numerical sensitivity, that story is hard to follow because the bank balance says one thing and the app says another. If the money is physically moved into a separate sub-account with its own debit card or a dedicated virtual card, the constraint is real. You don't have to do the math to know if you are overspending because the card will simply stop working when the bucket is empty. It turns a cognitive task into a physical boundary.
That brings us to the second order effects of this whole issue, which is the avoidance snowball. Herman, you mentioned some staggering stats about what happens when people start avoiding their financial data because of this anxiety.
The avoidance snowball is documented in behavioral science as the ostrich effect. Studies show that financial anxiety leads to a 30% increase in late fee accumulation purely because people are avoiding the information that causes them distress. They are not necessarily lacking the money, they are lacking the cognitive bandwidth to engage with the notification. They see an email from their bank, their heart rate spikes, and they archive it without opening it. That 30% increase is a direct tax on anxiety.
It is a literal cost of being stressed. And this overlaps with what we talked in episode 8086 regarding the sensory budget. We discussed how high-stress inputs drain your executive function. Financial anxiety is like a background process on a computer that is hogging 80% of the central processing unit. Even when you aren't looking at your bank account, the knowledge that you are avoiding it is a hidden sensory input. It is a loud, high-pitched noise that you have tried to tune out, but your nervous system is still reacting to it. It drains your ability to make good decisions in other areas of your life, like your health or your work.
How do we perform a financial audit without triggering that noise? We need frictionless audits. Instead of a table of numbers, imagine a dashboard that uses color coding. We are seeing more tools now that use machine learning to predict your upcoming bills based on past behavior and then visually gray out that money in your balance. You see a total balance of $2,000, but the app shows you an available balance of $600 because it knows $1,400 is already spoken for. You can process those colors and visual blocks in milliseconds without ever engaging the part of your brain that struggles with arithmetic.
That is a much more honest way to represent data to a human brain. Our brains aren't naturally evolved to understand compound interest or complex ledgers. We evolved to understand resources. Do I have enough grain in the storehouse to last the winter? The graying out of funds is a visual proxy for a physical reality. It takes the abstract number and turns it into a resource map. Herman, tell me about the threshold alert system as a case study for this.
The threshold alert system is a way to outsource the monitoring entirely. Instead of checking your balance every day, which is a high-friction task, you set up automated triggers. You tell the system, do not talk to me if everything is fine. Only send me a notification if my balance drops below $500 or if a charge over a certain amount occurs. This changes the relationship from constant, anxiety-inducing monitoring to exception-based management. One of our listeners implemented this by setting up a text alert that only triggers when her main spending account hits $100. Until she gets that text, she gives herself permission to not think about the numbers at all. It effectively silenced the high-pitched noise of financial dread.
That reduces the frequency of exposure, which is vital for recovery. But we also need to talk about low-dose financial exposure. If you avoid something entirely, your fear of it grows until it becomes this monster in the closet. To break the avoidance snowball, you might need a scheduled 5-minute weekly check-in. Not a deep dive, not a reconciliation of every receipt, just a 5-minute glance at those visual dashboards. We call it the 5-Minute Friday.
The goal of that exposure is to prove to your nervous system that looking at the numbers won't kill you. If you do it when things are relatively stable, you build up a bit of resilience for when things are tight. It is like exposure therapy for your wallet. You are training your amygdala to stay calm in the presence of a bank statement.
Let's distill this into some practical takeaways for Daniel and anyone else feeling this freeze response. The first step is to adopt binary budgeting. Stop trying to track 42 different categories. Focus on 2 numbers: what is safe to spend and what is do not touch. If you can get your brain to accept that binary, you have won half the battle.
Step 2 is to outsource the math to the infrastructure. Use the bucket method. Set up your bank account so they do the categorizing for you. There are several modern banks now that let you create 10 or 20 sub-accounts for free. Use them. Give them names like rent, car, or summer vacation. Let the architecture of your bank account be your budget. If the money isn't in the bucket, it doesn't exist.
Step 3 is to move to visual data. Find tools that give you trend lines and color-coded bubbles instead of rows and columns. Your brain is a pattern recognition machine. Let it use that strength. Looking at a line going up or down is a much more intuitive way to understand your spending than looking at a list of $34 transactions. And finally, implement those threshold alerts. Give yourself permission not to think about money when things are within the safety zone.
This shifts the perspective from financial management being a chore you have to perform to it being a safety net that is always under you. It is about building a system that respects your cognitive limits rather than constantly testing them. We often treat financial literacy as if it is a mathematical skill, but it is fundamentally a system design skill. Being good with money doesn't mean you are good at long division. It means you are good at building an environment where you don't have to be good at long division.
The future of this is even more notable, Herman. We are starting to see the rise of invisible finance. As we move further into 2026 and beyond, AI-driven agents are starting to manage liquidity in real time. Imagine an agent that sees you have a large insurance premium coming up next month and quietly shaves 5% off your discretionary spending this week to cover it, without you ever having to look at a ledger. It would manage the trade-offs based on your stated values.
We are moving toward a world where the human defines the goals and the AI manages the flow. You tell the AI, I value travel and good coffee, but I want to make sure my rent is always covered and I want to retire by 60. The agent then manages the microtransactions and transfers to optimize for those goals. It takes the cognitive load down to near zero. You just live your life within the boundaries set by your own values, managed by a system that doesn't get anxious about numbers.
It turns the whole concept on its head. Instead of the human serving the numbers serve the human. For someone with math anxiety, that is a liberating shift. It moves money from the category of a threat to the category of a tool. Financial health isn't about being a math whiz. It is about building a system that knows you are not one. It is about recognizing that your time and your mental peace are also valuable resources that need to be budgeted.
That's a powerful final thought. Stability and the freedom to focus on things that matter are the real goals. If a spreadsheet gets in the way of that, throw the spreadsheet away. There are other ways to build a storehouse.
That's a great place to wrap this up. Thanks as always to our producer, Hilbert Flumingtop, for keeping the gears turning behind the scenes. And a big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power this show.
This has been My Weird Prompts. If you found this discussion helpful, or if you know someone who breaks out in a cold sweat at the sight of a bank statement, consider sharing this episode with them. A quick review on your podcast app also goes a long way in helping us reach more people who might be looking for a different way to think about these topics.
We will be back soon with another prompt. Until then, take care of your sensory budget and your bank account will follow. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, my weird prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through, my weird